Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Into the Kinoverse. I'm your host, Pure Kino. And in today's episode, we have a very special guest, probably the most famous guest we've had on the podcast so far. He is the author behind such works as American Desperado, How to Get Away with Murder in America, and most famously for our audience, the incredible Generation Kill. I'm joined today by Evan Wright. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah, this is great to have you on the podcast. This came about in a kind of interesting way. So I did I did a video kind of covering the miniseries Generation Kill based on your work, and you actually saw it. I think someone linked it to you on Twitter, and it's the first time I've ever had a creator, someone who made a show, or not made the show, but was heavily involved in the show and the work, actually like a video that I've done, actually see it. So that was really cool, and I reached out and I was like, hey, gotta get him on a podcast. We gotta talk about this incredible book and incredible miniseries.
Yeah, and by the way, I really like the video. So yeah. And it's such a rare, Twitter is such a source of woe and difficulty on the planet that it's cool when actually you make good contacts on Twitter. So.
Yeah, it's awesome. And like I said, it's the first time this has happened, and I really didn't expect that video to do well or to anyone to really notice it. I made it just because I loved the miniseries Generation Kill. I watched it for the first time. I did this big retrospective for The Wire, and David Simon and Ed Burns, who were behind The Wire, also made Generation Kill, and I had a little bit of that video talking about Generation Kill, just analyzing the other shows that they'd worked on. But I was like, hey, this is such a great miniseries. I got to do a standalone video for it. The first time I literally watched the series, I literally finished the last episode and immediately started back from the first episode just because I had to watch it again. It's that incredible. And I'd love to start off this conversation by talking about your experience in writing the thing. How did Generation Kill come about? How did that process happen for you?
Wow. What a question. I actually had, when the War on Terror started with the attacks on the Twin Towers, I remember the morning that happened. And this is the story of how I began.
Yeah.
Because I was working for Rolling Stone magazine I was like their crime story writer, and culture and just crazy things. Usually if there was violence, I wrote about it.
Yeah.
And so as the towers were going down, my editor from Rolling Stone called me, and he lived in New York, and I think he had seen one go down. And it was so crazy because he said, I bet you there are people around the world watching this, and for them, seeing the planes go into these towers is like the scene in Star Wars when they blow up the Death Star.
Yeah.
And so my editor right away was really into not just the story of 9/11.
Yeah.
But he was a really good editor in that he was always interested in what's the perspective of the people that hit us or whatever. And so from that point, of course, I wanted to write about what was happening. Yeah. And I was very frustrated because I was writing a story. I think after 9/11, I was assigned. So when 9/11 happened that day, Will was like, is there anything you can do in Los Angeles where I was living connected to 9/11? And I just got in LA, I'll interview Oliver Stone, because he wrote these sort of seminal films on the Vietnam War, and we're in this new era. And so I had this great experience for several nights. I met with Oliver Stone and interviewed him. Yep. And he said these amazing things about 9/11. And it was funny because he was very right wing. He was we need to just kick ass, all this stuff. I was totally surprised.
Yeah.
And then the story didn't run because what happened is Rolling Stone, with 9/11 happening, had just assigned everybody they knew, just write something.
Yeah.
And in the rush, they didn't want my like 20-hour interview with Oliver Stone. So the funny part of the story is Oliver Stone started calling me like every week, like wondering what the conspiracy was, like why his story was killed. And he'd be like, Evan, so, what do you think it is? Is it Jan? Was he thinking this? Jan, the publisher.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, no, I think we didn't get enough advertisements. And there wasn't space. Yeah. So that was like my first 9/11 story wasn't even published.
Yeah.
So, and at the time, I think I was also profiling Shakira, the singer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was extremely frustrated. Like, oh my God, like people are going to war and I'm with Shakira, which wasn't that bad in some ways, but yeah. So in the midst of this, I'm going to tell a story that no one knows.
Ooh.
I don't think so. And it's kind of long and complicated, but
I want it. Give it to me.
Yeah. So I worked for Hustler magazine reviewing porn films, and it's where I first wrote features.
Mm-hmm.
Features meaning news stories that were not adult themed.
Yeah.
And so, and Hustler magazine and the porn industry at the time, before the internet took it over, they were always like afraid of getting like sued for obscenity. And so what they did is every month they financed a couple of stories that were non-porn related.
Yeah.
And that way, if they got sued, they could say, look, we're not a porn magazine. We have like serious news stories.
Like intellectual. I think like Playboy, one of their first issues had a Ray Bradbury story in it.
Yes. Now Playboy started that, but they were much softer, and Hustler was like a disgusting magazine. And, like, it was just horrifying. Like, when I worked there, people would meet me and they'd be like, oh, you seem like a nice person. And they'd find out I worked there. And if they hadn't seen it, they'd be like, oh, I'm going to look it up and see what that magazine looks like. They'd be like, oh, like, you're a monster. But so anyway, I had worked there. And Larry Flint, his business model, the publisher of Hustler, was to get into the news by getting sued or causing trouble. So he wanted, when we invaded Afghanistan, Larry Flint wanted to try to send a reporter to Afghanistan.
Uh-huh.
And his goal was to, like, basically he wanted the Pentagon to say no. And then he wanted to sue them on First Amendment grounds, because that was the other thing he did. He published a porn magazine, but he cast himself as a First Amendment crusader. And in some ways he really was.
Yeah.
In many ways he was just this like weirdo, crass guy. But so he was scheming, like, how can I use the 9/11 attacks to promote my porn magazine?
Yeah.
And my old boss from Hustler, I was working for Rolling Stone, called me and he said, would you go to Afghanistan? And I was like, sure. Because they wanted me to be like, they were going to try to petition the Pentagon and get rejected.
Yeah.
So what happened is, so I was, the reason I said yes is Rolling Stone, we were having no luck getting into the war in Afghanistan. So Larry Flint approached the Pentagon and said, we're going to embed Evan Wright. And they didn't say no. He was like, they didn't play his game. And so the first story that no one knows is that Larry Flint really started the embed program unofficially in Afghanistan when he tried to get rejected by the Pentagon by assigning a reporter. And so that's just a funny little footnote to history. And so they said yes to me for Hustler. And the thing is, like, the private story that neither Larry Flint knew nor anyone at Hustler, they didn't understand this. I hated that magazine. Like, I had worked there and it was funny, but I just wanted to get out and never go back. So I had no intention of like after finally getting out of Hustler to normal magazines of going back. But I had done the whole thing because then I found another guy who would name David Bookbinder, a writer who went for Hustler to Afghanistan later on. But I then, once the Pentagon opened up to Larry Flint, I went back to them for Rolling Stone and applied. So my first combat reporting, I'm sorry, it wasn't a very exciting story.
No, that was very exciting. Like that was a specific question I wanted to have too, which was like, why did the government basically allow embedded reporters? I mean, it's good to have them there, but from their perspective, I was like, why would you want someone covering potential, bad stuff that's happening out there?
So the first embed that they did, and they didn't call it embedding. I don't remember. I don't think they did, but the first forced embed they did, arguably, I believe, was Larry Flint trying to challenge them and get them to say no. So in that instance, one could probably surmise that they were smart politically and they weren't going to get into some stupid game with a porn guy. And they just said yes and probably hoped his reporter would get killed. The man who ran the program was Colonel Dave Lepan in the Pentagon. And he was, I don't know what he's doing now. He was a really wonderful person to work with. He was like their senior public affairs officer. And so he contacted me through the Hustler / Rolling Stone dance that I did to get into Afghanistan in the war. And Dave Lepan, so we had a lot of contacts, which I'll go into in a moment. But years later, I attended a conference with him in Las Vegas, I think. And he actually spoke about the embed program. And he said that basically they came up with it. So independently of what Larry Flint was doing, at that time, they were already thinking in the Pentagon, we want to open this up to basically try to glorify the war and give our perspective in a way that like we can make the war look good. And the Americans feel happy about it. They also didn't want to piss off the media. And what Lepan said is that I think in the first Gulf War, they used some pool reporting system that angered people. So the embed program was to sort of open the military wide to the media. But it was always, of course, hoped that the media would, bond with the military and give favorable reporting.
And to an extent, that's kind of what happened, isn't it? I mean, your reporting is critical at times too, but it also is very like you're a part of the world of these Marines, and like you understand them in a way that I think a lot of reporters who are just reporting from the safety of America or whatever, they can kind of be judgmental in a way that I think your book kind of avoids that stuff.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and I don't want to wander off as I am prone to do, but jumping ahead when I got into Iraq or even from Afghanistan, it's very funny because before we started recording, I asked Pure Kino's age and I realized I was decades older. And what's funny is when I did my reporting in Iraq and Afghanistan before that, I was in my late 30s. And so I was actually younger than a lot of reporters. And I recognized right away that most reporters had a Vietnam War mindset. Like everybody else in America, they're shaped by television as much by their experience as reporters. And so the narrative of Vietnam was a very particular one that the U.S. is going to get its ass kicked and all this stuff. And the soldiers are like exploited draftees. And like, I could see that the reporters around me, many of them were in like a sort of, they were seeing the war through this lens. Because what you do as a reporter, by the way, now I'm famous for just jumping into topics.
No, go for it.
But what you do as a reporter is you almost, as a storyteller, is you almost try to bring in, when you're working, like a preconceived story that things fit into. And it's not because you're trying to be evil or twist the news. It's because you're working fast and you're like, what is the structure I'm going to build here? Yeah. And so I could see the reporters were reaching for, I've never been they're as scared as anybody. Yeah. I've never been in a war before. What happens in a war? It's like that Vietnam War movie where like the guy serves his country and gets wounded and he comes home and he's an angry patriot. Yeah. That's going to be my tone before the war started here. Now, I just knew. Yeah. Anyway, I'll let you lead this conversation.
No, that's great, and I want to get into all that. You were talking. I think we got off track. You were talking about your first embed, which was in Afghanistan before the stuff in Iraq.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing me back to reality, and I'll explain why. It's a really hard time to talk about the war in a moment, like not emotionally, because I've been immersed in a project related. to it. But so strangely enough, I'm like, I think I might have this wrong slightly, but I think I was covering Shakira as I was like trying to get into Afghanistan. Yeah. Shakira was lovely, by the way. Let's just take a moment. Yeah. To appreciate Shakira's beauty. Of course. In the year 2001. I think in my Rolling Stone article, I described her posterior movements when she danced as being like a hummingbird's wings.
Well, she's famous for that.
And she would like turn around. She was like, "Would you like to see my dance, Evan?"
Like, yes, please.
She was like in costume. And so the footnote is the first time in my life I ever rode in a helicopter was with Shakira in Mexico City. Oh, wow. And we had a helicopter for a week and I was following her around. But I was like terrified my first time in a helicopter. I'm afraid of heights. Yeah. And luckily, like, I don't know if Shakira did not take, I would love to say she took my hand, but she definitely gave me a reassuring look the first time the helicopter took off. And I was like, if I die, it's with Shakira. Yeah. Like, that's a good whatever. Just do whatever, Yeah. So that was like, people asked, what was your preparation for warfare? And I would always have to answer, my alcoholic lawyer mother, living with a wonderful, angry Armenian American who's tough as hell, and riding in the helicopter with Shakira. Those were my three preparations for combat.
That's all you need.
Yes. All women oriented too. It's kind of interesting. So I get to Afghanistan and, my thing, you have to understand, was always, I loved writing about a group of people. Yeah. And I don't know why, like whether it's neo-Nazis or I covered, like radical environmentalists, like the pre-Antifa, and I went on the road with them. And I actually, now that the statute of limitations has passed, I aided and abetted this like massive vandalizing spree across the West Coast with a bunch of anarchists in 1999. Or 2000 in a story for Rolling Stone. And all of my subjects were arrested and only me and another guy evaded the police so I could file the story. But I'd done all this stuff, and Afghanistan, what I learned is I simply loved a group of people. Yeah. So the military was like heaven, because when I arrived in Afghanistan, soldiers are fucking, by the way, I'm trying not to swear.
Oh, go for it.
I used to swear because my book is famous and added, but I think it's overdone now in public.
Like, definitely, No, but you can if you swear, it's totally fine. It's not this podcast is not
right. But it's funny, like you're getting the clean Evan, because I used to, when I talked about the war, I was like utterly filthy. But it's like, it's when politicians started swearing to sound like they were us. I was like, fuck you, politician.
Yeah. It's not cool anymore.
Yeah. If you do it, it's not cool. Your mom
No.
genes, all that shit. So anyway, I don't know where I was. Afghanistan, I get there and it was just great. It was a great experience covering the 3/187th Rakkasans, and then, which is an airborne military force in our army. And it was, I can't get into it, but it was just a great experience.
Yeah.
Very stressful. We were never directly shot at. And then I actually embedded with a special forces team in Afghanistan for a different mission. And I wrote about that, and I wrote about other things. But so my first experience in war and in embeds, although they didn't quite call it embeds yet, in Afghanistan for Rolling Stone. And I think I filed 3 stories, related, feature long stories related to that. I was, so anyway, yes, that was before Iraq.
That's great. And so that kind of naturally led you into being up for when they went into Iraq is that how you were kind of selected to be a part of that embed?
So, yes. So my features so it almost goes back to, I should get into this background. So people don't know this either, but when I worked at Hustler magazine in mid 90s in Los Angeles, Larry Flint had purchased Big Brother magazine. It was a skateboard magazine. And have you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Okay. Big Brother was the greatest, funniest magazine in the 90s. Now I'm jumping into a different topic because I'm a writer and I grew up just loving magazines. And, to me, the great humor magazines were Mad Magazine. That was like the comic sort of illustrated takedowns of culture. And then National Lampoon in the early 70s.
Of course, yep.
And after that, there was nothing until Big Brother came along. And it was this irreverent skateboard magazine. They just did crazy shit. Their office was next to mine. So after my boss, Larry Flint, bought this magazine, Big Brother, they moved the staff into our headquarters where we published the porn. Since I did the porn reviews, I got boxes and boxes of porn DVDs, which at the time was like a great thing. So the guys from Big Brother were always like, yo, let's hang out. And so, they'd come to my office and take my porn videos. Now, these guys made a video every year to promote Big Brother. And in the skateboard culture, videos were like the bread and butter of your identity.
Yeah.
Like if you were an illegal skateboarder, a street skater, you made videos and then you get sponsored.
Yeah.
So Big Brother, the skateboard magazine, did the same thing. And those videos turned into Jackass. The publishers of Big Brother were Jeff Tremaine, who's the producer of Jackass.
Oh, wow.
And he found Johnny Knoxville, and they came into my office once and they're the first thing Johnny Knoxville did was he shot himself with a 38 wearing a bulletproof vest.
Yeah.
So they came into my office and this other guy, Dave Carney, who worked there, and they were like, let's steal some videos. But Johnny Knoxville walks up to me and he's very formal. And he's like, hello, sir. I'm Johnny Knoxville and I just made this video. And I was like, what is it? He's like, I shoot myself with a bulletproof vest on. And I was like, what? And they put it on my computer. And I was like, this is crazy. And they're like, yeah, this is going to be our video.
Yeah.
And that's how they started Jackass, right?
Yeah.
And so they had this really funny approach to the world.
Yeah.
And you're hearing my Ring camera in the background, possibly.
Okay, no problem.
So they were just very irreverent, like Dave Carney. So what happened is Big Brother would want to cover porn stuff because they thought that was hilarious.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they would just do juvenile stuff. I took a Big Brother editor to a formal ball of porn stars.
Wow.
We got on the elevator and like they're all dressed up. And
Yeah.
I don't know why it was funny, but he farted loudly. And like, just like that was Big Brother. I don't,
Yeah.
like another story, like a better example would be they went to Disneyland and got arrested. Like they deliberately went to Disneyland and they were like diving off these things, and because they would do stunts, because
Yeah.
skateboarders do
Yeah.
crazy shit.
Yeah.
So the writers and editors of Big Brother were all skateboarders.
Yeah.
A couple of them were from Sacramento. Anyway, so, or one of them, I don't know. Anyway, the point is they went to Disneyland and they deliberately like jumped off of like I don't know, some viewing stand into
Yeah.
a canal for the submarine ride.
Oh my
And like
God.
had security chase them. And they brought with them like a failed, like once famous 80s metal band. So it's just this weird article of these guys,
Yeah.
and they get arrested, and it's a true story. And in the article, they write like the next line after the arrest is, "I am now in jail in the happiest place on earth." And I was like, shit, that is the best way to start like your paragraph or a
Yeah.
new section. Like they got sent to jail in the happiest place on earth. So I love those guys. I love their work. And I also had been covering skateboarders before. I myself wrote about Stevie Williams for ESPN magazine, and the Piss Drunks was this skateboarder group with Jim Greco, who were really popular at the time. And they were just like nuts. So when I went to Afghanistan, I'm finally trying to close the circle, dude. So my first coverage of war in this long circular ramble is that I went there having covered crime stories and like a lot of brutal stuff. Also, that's another side story. I got access to like white supremacist groups and stuff. So I'd done a lot of that work, and I'd done a lot of work with like kids, like 20-year-olds who were skateboarders. And when I met our American military in 2001 or whenever it was, and I got to Afghanistan actually in 2002. So the Marines, like, so after 9/11, the U.S. did like a sort of stealth invasion through the autumn of 2001. Then the Marines took Kandahar Airfield in about Christmas. And I got to Kandahar Airfield several months later, in like May or so of 2002. And when I arrived, the whole point of the circular story is that I just immediately saw that soldiers were like stressed and bored. They were laughing their asses off between patrols. And it was much more like hanging out with skateboarders. And so I wasn't writing the normal articles of like, oh, the boys are far from home and reading it, because people were unconsciously channeling the Vietnam War movies they'd been watching. The reporters. So anyway, I don't know what the fuck you asked me or what happened.
No, I think that was related to that. There, and that definitely comes across in the book. You paint the Marines in a very humanizing light. Again, not always a great light, depending on the actions, but in a very relatable way. And it reminds me of something from The Wire. And we'll talk about the David Simon stuff in a little bit. But they talk about how detectives have to go in with soft eyes, meaning you got to kind of leave your preconceptions behind to really see the full picture of everything, or else you're going to, again, have assumptions. It's going to lead you down the wrong path. So definitely cool that there's that connection there.
Yeah. That's interesting. The soft eyes. I've actually heard that from them, David and Ed at the time. But so yeah, and so, but I'm talking before Generation Kill. Like Afghanistan was like
no.
And the first article I wrote was called "Greetings from Askrakistan," because that's what they called it. But at the same time, because I'd done crime stories, I truly, I did the humor. Oh, it's also like the same thing. I'd done countless ride-alongs with cops. The equivalency of a ride-along with police in a large American city and going on a patrol in Afghanistan, it was very equivalent in terms of
Yeah.
stress levels
Yeah.
and humor and what you experience. The one difference is that kids are raw, people under the age of 20. So I did Generation Kill in that spirit, right? And it was an immersive experience for me as it was for the Marines because we were
Yeah.
all in this together. But one interesting thing, and one interesting thing that was different than covering cops, is that there's something idealistic about people under the age of 25
Yeah.
that still exists. And part of that, like, I only recognized it when I did Generation Kill, and I was talking to the Marines afterwards because they were like 19 to 20 years old. And what it is that when people are that age, even if they're like, I hate the reporter, I don't
Yeah.
like the liberal media,
Yeah.
stuff already existed.
Yeah.
Kids want to be honest. It's very hard for people under the age of 25 to lie about their own experiences the way older people do.
Yeah.
Because when you're under 25, you haven't been in the world much and you still believe it's a certain way and you still believe in honesty in a way that we get adulterated as we become more adult.
Absolutely.
And so what I'm getting at is the Marines were so honest about their experiences to me. I mean, so there was another big difference as I was there with them.
Yeah.
But even afterwards, and even after the works came out and they were being attacked, as younger people, it didn't occur. Like, so some of them like had some career difficulty because of it.
Yeah.
But as younger people, they were just like, well, of course I said what happened.
Yeah.
But when I deal with people over 25, man, that you don't get that. Right?
No.
So
they want to paint it in a very certain light.
Yeah, I definitely just saw that. And then Josh Ray Person himself, I'm jumping to this other thing. So what I'm getting at is I sort of understood the humor, but I also I understood their freshness as younger people. But then as Josh Person also reported, and Josh was the driver.
Yeah.
And played by James P.J. Ransone in the show. And the real Josh is an incredible guy.
Yeah.
And like, he was so smart. And he, like, when the articles came out or the book or something, he was like, wow. He said to me, he called me and he said, oh, Evan, he said, I realized something. I was like, what? He said, because you were with us, you saw things. He said, this is what he said to me. And now he has a podcast where Josh says critical things about my reporting. So I don't want to like put words in his mouth.
No,
but in this instance, he was like, he said, you were with us. And he said, so when I was reading your account in the book of certain of the combat sequences, he said, I realized my memories got things wrong because they immediately started to change. And he said, he said, I remembered now when I read certain details that I had started to change it in my mind. And what Josh said, he said, Evan, he said, if you had done this reporting by riding like even like half an hour behind us, and like we would walk up to you half an hour later and say, here's what happened.
Yeah.
He said it already would have been corrupted. He said it was like, but you were right there.
Yeah.
Now, I corrupted it as a human reporter for other, but
of course,
it was very pure in that way too, in that I was with them getting their live reactions.
Yeah. And that's another question I wanted to ask about, which is, why did they select you to ride in Colbert's vehicle, the lead vehicle of Bravo, right? Like, you would think that you would want the reporter towards the back where it's a little bit more safe, and also maybe you want another Marine in that car because the Humvees can only fit 4 people. Why were you selected to ride in Colbert's vehicle?
By the way, the last comment you made was one of the sharpest. Were you in the military?
No, not.
Okay.
No.
No, but just because like most people don't understand that putting reporter in the Humvee reduces your combat power by a significant percentage. It's 5 people in the Humvee, right?
Okay. Yeah. And the gunner. Yeah, you're right.
Platform in the middle. Right. But if you think of it as 4 people with guns on either side, the driver doesn't have a gun. Mm-hmm. So on the left side, you only have 1 gunner.
Yep.
That would be Trombley in our vehicle with the saw. And on the right side where I am, you have Colbert, the team leader. And he has a M203 and an M4, but he's occupied commanding the team. So you would really want a person with a saw gun, a machine gunner on the where I sat. And so to peel back that question and try to answer it in under 3 hours, going back to now, when I met Dave Lepan and went to Afghanistan, we were gearing up for the invasion of Iraq. I returned home and you were like, how'd you end up in Iraq? So the Afghan articles were considered a success at Rolling Stone. People read them. They talked about them. That's what mattered. And so they were like happy that I did that at Rolling Stone. And so the honest truth is I've been right about some things and wrong about others. And I was like, there's no way we'd be dumb enough to invade Iraq. After I was in Afghanistan, I was like, there's no way we would go into Iraq. I was like studying the situation.
Yeah.
I was like, but there's a way Evan Wright can profit from this because I was on a yearly contract with Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I went to Jan and I was like, listen, if we invade Iraq, I'll like go in the lead Humvee. I'll do whatever. But I would demand a pay raise. And it was actually some like measly pay raise because we weren't actually paid that much.
Yeah.
But, and there's like no health benefits, like nothing, like no security whatsoever. It was such a ripoff, those contracts. But I was like, oh, I want like, $1,000 more a year and I'll go to war for you. Whatever it was something like ridiculous. Nothing. Yeah. So, he's like, okay. And then like things start heating up and they're like, he calls me one day. It was like January 2003, I guess. And he was like, can you go to the Middle East now? And I was like, yeah. So we were like gearing up for the invasion of Iraq starting in, late 2000. I was in Afghanistan in 2002. I get home, do the articles, do my contract negotiation, and then I go right to the Middle East and I hang out in Bahrain and Kuwait for months waiting for the war to start. And I do embeds there and stuff. So how I got to First Recon was, in a nutshell, I started writing once I'd been to Afghanistan and I saw the game. I realized, you got to like make friends with the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And Dave Lepan, who was the head of the media, informally embedded me in 2002 in Afghanistan. Now, as we're gearing up for war in Iraq, I have his email. So I just start writing to him. And my uncle had been a Marine in World War II, and he had this great story, Kenneth York. And he had been a machine gunner in the 1930s, and then he used the Marine Corps to become an officer to go to law school. But when World War II started, he was a machine gunner still. And so he defended like the Hotel del Coronado in San Diego, which was a luxury gig for like a month after Pearl Harbor. And then I believe he was in Guadalcanal and some other places, and he became a colonel, and he served General Green, who was like this legendary figure in the Marine Corps. So I was like, oh, dude, I'm going to do the name game. So I just started writing Dave Lepan, and I talked about my uncle, and I was like, listen, I love the Marine Corps. I'm close to my uncle, he had died, but I'm close to my uncle, and I travel light. So a magazine, I don't have cameras, and I don't have to file every day. I don't even need to bring a sat phone if you don't want to. So we go and we wait for the war to start. And what happens is the process to the beginning of the invasion of Iraq was, and covering it was, The invasion happened March 20th, 2003. That's the official day we crossed the line.
Yeah.
And about 10 days earlier, all these reporters who'd been communicating with the Pentagon and put themselves into the embed pool.
Yeah.
No one was told where they would go, what would happen to them.
Yeah.
We were all called to this Hilton hotel in Kuwait, and there was 500 reporters, and I believe only 2 magazines, like a handful of magazines.
Yeah.
And so they're announcing publicly like this lottery, like, and they are like Rolling Stone magazine, first recon. And I think it's in my book or somewhere where I'm like, all the reporters turned and looked at me with such dirty looks.
Yeah.
I knew this. I didn't know what the fuck it was, but I was like, this must be good. Because all these like old military reporters were looking at me like with envy. And I was like, this is great. Because if other reporters hate you, you're on to something. So
absolutely.
I was like, whatever it is, it's cool. So then there was like still 3 days where we're living in our like hotels in Kuwait, like living large. And we're not, oh no, this was like earlier. It was like a few weeks before the war. Cause then they're like, oh, we're going to put you through gas training.
Yeah.
So then I find out, oh dude, I'm going to bring this all the way back to how I wound up in Colbert's Humvee.
Yeah.
So then I found out that there was another reporter assigned to First Recon, Hampton Sides, the acclaimed author of a book, I think, called Ghost Soldiers and other fine writings. And I was like, shit, because I had this chip on my shoulder that I was like an ex-porn guy. And I was like, oh no, there's another like real reporter who's assigned with First Recon.
Yeah.
And he looks like he's done some like real work.
Yeah.
And so I meet him and he's like really smooth and like cool. And I was like, oh shit. So then like I start hanging out with him. He's very literary. And
Yeah.
he's like summering in the Hamptons and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, can't compete. And then, but we start going through the gas mask training.
Yeah.
I'm like, I was like, honestly, so there was this Army veteran reporter who I buddied up with, and he was like, you know what, Evan? He said, I'll help you.
Yeah.
He was assigned somewhere else. He's like, we're going to get rid of this guy. So I go through the gas training with him and I'm sitting with him. And it's a true story. My great grandfather, Walter Knapp, before World War I, volunteered to go to Bethesda, Maryland and test American made gas masks. And he actually got one that leaked. And he was exposed to poison gas by our own government. He went to France, fought in World War I, returned home with a lung ailment and died.
Yeah.
So I start talking to Hampton about like how my great grandfather died from gas. And then like in the training, they're like, get the mask on fast because if your skin is exposed to certain chemicals, it'll pop up like Jiffy Pop. It's like at lunch, like when we were eating with Hampton, me and the other guy were like, oh, your skin popping up like Jiffy Pop. That's horrible.
Oh no.
Then they talked about vomiting in your face mask. And like, I'm like telling him stories about Jimi Hendrix dying in his own vomit.
Yeah.
And like, we just like talked about death and mayhem and how everything was going to go bad.
Yeah.
And Hampton, I mean, I'm like, he was a really nice guy. And like, he actually came to me and he's like, oh, I've got like kids.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I was honest with him. I was like, you do realize like nothing is worth it in life.
Yeah.
You have a family.
Yeah.
And like, I was like, why would you do this if you have a family? And he was like, I mean, he brought that up too.
Yeah.
So, you know, I helped talk him into how it was like the reasonable decision would be to go home.
Yeah.
So I get rid of Hampton. He goes home. And then there were 2 photographers assigned and they like quit. They wouldn't come when they found out. So what the military was saying is they're like, oh, if you go with First Recon, they're going to seize a bridge behind enemy lines and might all die. Yeah. And so I didn't have kids. I worked at Hustler. And as I told Josh Person before this ambush at Garaf, when they told us we were going to get smoked, I was like, dude, I've already had sex with 2 women in life. I achieved my life dream. Like, I don't care if I die here in Iraq.
Yeah.
And it was kind of true. That, like,
Yeah.
the extent of my life ambitions were satisfied
Yeah.
on Halloween 1987 when these 2 girls grabbed me at this party. And so, like, ever since, I've been like, I don't care if I die.
Yeah.
The
Expendable.
experience was worth. You don't actually need it, though, more than once.
Yeah. No.
There's a downside to it also.
Oh my God. That's
So
so funny.
getting back to all of this, I thought I'd take that aside. I end up alone with this battalion at
Yeah.
Camp Matilda. And so how do I end up in, so I get rid of everybody. I didn't want to get rid of the photographers. I didn't have photographers
Yeah.
with me, but I get rid of everybody. And there was also another translator who was supposed to come, and he quit. Mish, the translator, who's a comical figure in the book, he and I are the only civilians with this battalion, right? So the long answer that I've finally gotten to is I show up, I meet Lieutenant. They wanted the battalion wanted the reporters to ride with H&S battalion in the rear.
Yeah.
They first put me in a tent with like officers and shit. And I was like, this is going to be boring.
Yeah.
I meet Nate Fick. We have dinner like my first night. He's like, you should meet my guys.
Yeah.
And I walk into their tent, and it was like, by the way, this happened. I love my sources. So I would have loved any tent I walked into, but I love these guys.
Yeah.
And as soon as we met, I was like, I love these guys. We started talking. All the characters you know from the TV show.
Yeah.
I met them that first night, and they were those characters.
Absolutely.
And so I was like, shit, I don't want to leave. So as we gear up for the war, they're like, Evan's got to go back. Like, so before we invaded, like up to rolling out to the line when we moved out the desert, it was only like 5 minutes before we left that they were like, listen, Colbert was supposed to have the other translator because there was going to be a translator with Team 1 in that vehicle. It's the logical place to put one.
That
and
makes
so
sense.
That translator bailed.
Yeah.
And so I got the translator's place. I thought I would finally answer your question, so you can answer.
No, that does bring it all the way back to it. So it wasn't like they were losing a Marine in that vehicle. It was already going to be a non-combatant. And so it was a natural place to kind of fit you in there.
Yes.
And how lucky for us, because I think like that vantage point you had there, I talked about that in the video a little bit, is like, again, like Josh said, you got to see these events firsthand, not just hear about them later, not just report on it later, but like there's a level of realism and authenticity in the book that I think could only come from that vantage point.
Yeah, I know. And it's strange. And I honestly, did not set out to write a war book in my life. I love, by the way, I'm a historian. I study medieval history. I love warfare. So I love it as a subject. I love it in part because I'm horrified by it. They actually, I read years ago, and I don't know, everybody quotes studies these days, and like they're usually wrong or insane.
Absolutely.
But I think it's probably true because it makes sense. And I think I read it before the media imploded and everything became just like a weird lie. But the study was this. They did a profile of children, and they could somehow rate who's the least disturbed by violence in a film and who's the most disturbed. I don't know how they figure that out. And then they give these kids, they put them alone in a room with a film that's violent, and they give them a pause button and the ability to rewind and rewatch things. And what do they find out? The kids who were most disturbed by violence were most likely to stop on it and rewind it and keep watching it.
Yeah.
And they think it's because they were so disturbed.
Yeah.
We as humans have this like desire to solve our problems. So, if I'm disturbed, it's weird. I've been writing a memoir for years about something else that happened in my past. And I had to remember my childhood. And when I used to watch TV as a kid, I would like run and hide when there was violence.
Oh, yeah.
How did I end up covering war?
I think, I mean, yeah, I think it's like you said, it's a pretty natural, like, the fear almost makes you fascinated by it. And I think that's why we are attracted not just to stuff like Generation Kill, but stuff like The Wire and The Sopranos, these shows that like show a very dark side of humanity. It's fascinating for a lot of us, and we almost deal with our fears by like viscerally experiencing stuff through the media.
Right. It's a safe way of playing with our monsters, you know.
Absolutely. I want to touch briefly on, because I don't know if you have a hard stop at exactly any time.
I can talk. I have all day long.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll keep going. I wanted to touch briefly on how the mini series itself came about. So, you know, you write this book. It became, you know, it starts out as articles. It becomes this full novel. Does how did the series get pitched? Did you have to go to HBO, or did they come to you to option it?
So if I knew then what I knew now, I would be the creator of Generation Kill, because I'm the creator by technical Writers Guild standards, meaning I pitched it.
Yeah.
So what happened is, oh my God, I could tell such long stories. And we need to reserve, like, if we go a little bit over your hour, I'd love
No, we can go as long as you need.
Okay, I'd love like 5 minutes to talk about a current project that fits all.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the long and short story, I love, part of the reason I tell these long stories that are serendipitous is I'm trying to inspire any writer who's listening.
Yeah.
And to say that, like, you set goals in life, and sometimes you have no clue how you will get there, but if you have them, I think you then find a pathway. And cause when I said I had no intention of covering war, I should mention that actually in my first contract with Rolling Stone, my first note to my editor, I said, if you hire me, I want first precedent to cover war.
Yeah.
I did want to go my whole life, but I wanted to clarify that. But back to, what was the question?
How did the miniseries come about?
Yeah, the miniseries. So I come back from Iraq, and I, like, on fire to write this 3-part series for Rolling Stone that was assembled in this like amazing, you know, fit of time and you know, going through the accuracy of my quotes and everything. And so I finished this, and now it's the summer of 2003. The invasion has happened. Bush has declared mission accomplished.
Yeah.
And first thing I did is, before I went to Iraq, I had, on my way there, a book editor called me, and he's like, listen, if you do something interesting, call us.
Yeah.
And we'll publish a book. Like, they were just sort of like casting a wide net. So I come back, I write the Rolling Stone articles. I call dude at the book publisher, and I'm like, I have this series in Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
It was it was a huge deal. And Justin Timberlake threatened to sue us because Josh Ray Person, I quoted him, humorously calling him a pussy faggot retard.
Yeah.
A quote on that. I don't use that language.
No, of course.
And he called them that in our first article, and Justin Timberlake's people were going to sue Rolling Stone or withdraw. So there's all this like acclaim and everything.
Yeah.
And I like have a book waiting, and I call the publisher, and I'm like, let's hook me up, give me a book. And they're like, cool. And they offered this, like, I would take anything, but I got this agent who I found through this like neighbor in my apartment building that I was involved with. And she's like, I have a girlfriend who works at an agency. And I found, so I was like, through her, I meet this guy at ICM, Richard Abate, who's a great character, great, very successful agent now. And we go to this publisher, and they offer this sum, and he's like, that's nothing. He's like, you went to war. And so we get on this big call, and we're like, why did you offer me nothing? And the woman in the marketing department goes, you wrote a book proposal that says, I quoted this guy saying, this Iraqi saying, you have kicked apart the Sunni Shia conflict. There's going to be infinite war for the next 20 years in the Middle East or something.
Yeah.
And I quoted all these people saying it's going to be a disaster soon.
Yeah.
And the head of marketing at this publisher is like, listen, your book is too negative. We won the war. And we can't market this. It's going to come out in a year's time, and you're saying all these negative things. And I was like, she said, can you take that out? And I was like, fuck no. And my agent was like, that woman's a dipshit. So we go to another publisher, and they offered like, actually still not a lot of money, but more money. And I write, I had a book proposal that sold. So now what I did is I'm at this agency, and they're like, we'll pair you with a big time Hollywood writer, and he'll develop it. Adi Hassak, nice guy. He'd been in the Israeli military. We meet. And this is why I pitched it. So what is the story that I told in Generation Kill? You don't have to answer that. Like, I'll tell you, I told the story that I was going to tell. Remember I said journalists go into everything with the paradigm before? So I went to Iraq. I mean, I went to Camp Matilda, and I met this fantastic platoon that I described, Lieutenant Fick. I had 10 days with them before the war started. I immediately started writing the story in my head, not to be biased, but to immediately have some structure to put this into.
Mm-hmm,
I immediately looked at them, and I was like, this is going to be, and once I saw that Colbert had a team, I was like, oh, Colbert's the dad. The ATL is the mom. Who's trying to get dad. You don't want dad to get angry. Mom tries to keep dad happy. Bromley is like the little baby. The other gunner is like the mature child. And I'm the weird uncle who's like on this road trip to Florida to hell, you know, like a family trip. So my first thing was, I'm going to cast, because I was afraid, believe it or not, there would be no war. So I was like, what fucking story am I going to do? It's going to be these guys preparing, but the real story is about this family. So that was my first thing. And then the next thing, as Marine humor was much more extreme than Army. And I was like, it's Jackass Goes to War.
Absolutely.
So I fucking wrote that in like a note to my editor before the war started. So I go to Iraq, and that was like my whole structure for the articles. Like in my head, I was writing Jackass Goes to War, the TV show and then film, because I knew those guys. So I'm giving you, that's my background, right? So I was drawing on that relevant experience. And so what was the question?
How the miniseries came about.
So I have a big time Hollywood writer comes to me. He's like, I was in the Israeli military. I have all these experiences. And I was like, great. And he said, and I was like, of the mindset, at the time I was like, just give me the money, go sell this, make a show. I don't give a shit. I want the most money. Turn it into like a musical. I don't care what you do with this. I was so crass. I was like, I just want money.
They kind of did turn it into a musical.
Yes. And so, but instead, he starts calling me all the time. He's like, I want to pick your brain and talk about it. So I end up in the pitch meeting with him, sitting across from this executive at HBO. And she's like, what's the story? And he's like, turns to me and he's like, well, Evan has like a good take on it. And I like tell the executive at HBO, I said, listen, I went to war to Baghdad and all this stuff, but the show I would do is like National Lampoon's Family Vacation, but from Colbert's Humvee. And it's Jackass Goes to War. And I said, that's all it is. Like, it's a road trip. And so they bought it, right? And Adi Hassak wrote a very different script, and it died. So internally, my dreams, first of all, I was pissed off that I had to go to the pitch meeting and do any work at all. As a writer who's fought to get paid, I was like, I hate doing work for free. So I was like, oh, I had to pitch this thing. And I didn't realize if I'd had a proper agent, he would have gone, whoa. You went to the pitch meeting? You're the creator, dude. But instead I deferred. So I'm just giving you a tale of like.
Of course.
So I pitched it. They bought it on my pitch. And then he wrote something else. It died. Then a new executive came to me like a year or two later at HBO and Carrie Ann Tholis. And he was like, we love your book. David Simon read your book and he
Mm-hmm.
wants to do it now. And I was like, cool. And then I met with David Simon and we worked intensively on this. And I hadn't seen The Wire. The Wire was like up to season 2 had aired. So before I flew out to Baltimore to meet David, I watched like the first season of The Wire and I was like, oh my God, this is like the way to
perfect.
This can do it. And his humor was like my humor. David has like, we spent a lot of time just making each other laugh, you know?
Yeah.
They were doing a scene in The Wire where this guy, this hitman is trying to explain how a female got the jump on him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, she like pulled a gun from her snap. It was unseemly. And like I was there where they were like, did that line. Right? And like we were just like laughing. And so I met him when they were doing The Wire. We had all our meetings. And so from the start, but I should have gotten story credit on Generation Kill, but I didn't. But from the start, I was like, yes, this is like a family trip. And David, his thing was like, I want to have the people in the Humvee and you never see the officers.
Mm-hmm.
You never see Ferrando. And I, cause he said, that's how your book is. And I was like, well, listen, Dave, like that, it may seem that way.
Yeah.
It seems like that. But I said, every Marine is like tied into this like network. And it's like a steel chain. And that steel chain goes from like their immediate superior to the team leader to the platoon commander up to Colonel Ferrando. And they see them all the time. And I said, we can't do this without personifying Ferrando. And those officer meetings. And I didn't put the meetings as much in my book that we depict in the show. But those meetings really happened. And so I built Ferrando out of those meetings that, you know, that sort of fill the show when we go to his POV.
Oh, I think those are absolutely necessary because again, it relates to the themes that you get at in the series, which is a little bit that dysfunctionality of like intentions. And I think that why The Wire was like the creators of The Wire was such a perfect match for the show is The Wire dealt with those exact same things, right? Institutions kind of failing the people that they're supposed to be representing.
Yes. However, now it's all true, but I want to get into some like quick thing and then I have to get to some project I'm on now. It's all related. And it's why I agreed to talk. I've not talked on podcasts for a while, but, David and Ed were perfect cops. A reporter who's covered cops. Remember I said it's a ride along. It's working at an emergency room hospital. You know, the ER is the same, but to war very much. I mean, war is different for other reasons. So that was great. But I want to say something. It's not that institutions are bad, that they're failing, you know, and so this is like the news angle. Like you always have to do, why are we telling a story now? Because it's a crisis now. This crisis was just, you have to invent the crisis now. The truth is institutions suck. They're like, they're horrible and they're hard to design. You know, our government, look at our government, right? But it actually works. Look at Russia's government. They're making terrible decisions as an institution. And so what I get at is like, whenever, like the truth is, I want to say my work so what's ironic is I really bonded with the Marines. I showed them as they are, but my work was actually like, people were like, oh, if you're embedded, you get co-opted. No, I'm a journalist. I'm a traitorous motherfucker. That's why we're journalists. And for real, what I don't mean is personal betrayal. I mean, I'm loyal to the story. I'm not loyal to you. I'm loyal to the story. So I can love you as a person, but I'm doing the story when I work, right? So I love these guys. I presented them, I think, as they were. But I showed failings and I called out like General Mattis, who promised us they would not release prisoners. And then we did. And I wrote about the civilian casualties in a way that other journalists weren't covering. I wrote about the 3,000 artillery shells we dumped on Nasiriyah overnight with we had lost radio comms with the unit that was on the ground. So they were firing artillery blindly. 3,000 rounds is what the Ukrainians fired, less than the Ukrainians fired in one day on the front across a 600 or so mile front in Ukraine. We did that in 24 hours in a town the size of like, you know, a nothing town in Indiana.
Exactly.
So I reported that. It didn't really make news, but my reporting was very critical. But what I'm getting at is the honest truth is my reporting actually captured a military working as fine as a military could.
Yeah.
You know, and so HBO, what I'm getting at is when we did the HBO show, because they're trying to sell it from an angle, it's always like, we have to do the institutional failure. So the only note we ever did was like, add another complaint about not having enough batteries. So that we can show the troops suffering. Vietnam era troops. But the truth is, you're never going to have enough batteries, and you're always going to have dirt bags. And they built in so much redundancy into our military that when fucking Captain America has a meltdown for real, and like should have been put into like the rubber tent in the rear, they, you know, a fine sergeant, an E5 level sergeant rises up and basically runs that platoon because our military is so good. So it's a mixed bag. You want to cover the flaws, but man, we did good work there, actually. I mean, and I was so opposed to the war, more than grounds, but our military did fine work.
No, I think that comes across both in your book and in the series too. I think that there is a lot of fuck ups and stuff that happens, but at the end of the day, these guys get their jobs done. And I think both medias accomplished that message. Like, I didn't come away from it thinking that like, oh, you know, the military's awful. Like, no, the military's made up of great guys like Vic and Colbert and, you know, these amazing people. And are there mistakes? Absolutely. But, you know, that's just kind of human.
Yeah, no, I, with all respect to people that are younger than me, I do feel that the people that were serving in the military and heard the call to go, even though the war was fucked up, were like the finest. They became the finest of their generation in terms of their behavior. I don't know if they were the finest when they left. But like, if you really studied Vietnam and the level of like My Lai massacres and shit like that going on, shit happened in Iraq, and like any invasion, so many innocents were killed. But the occupation of Iraq there was so like, yes, we had to cover like when Blackwater shot people, but our soldiers were so disciplined, and like they never got the credit for that. Never got the credit.
No. Media, we talked about it before. Media, they always like to portray it in a very certain light. They go in with a preconception. It's like Vietnam. Either the soldiers are oppressed or they're the oppressors. It's horrible. And again, what I liked so much about Generation Kill was how you show the nuance there. There's brutality. Yes, there's a lot of horror that happens, but there's a lot of camaraderie. There's a lot of genuine heroism from a lot of these guys. And you know, the level is different between each individual Marine, but you've got, again, people like Colbert and stuff who are really there to do good, even if some of their actions have negative consequences that they can't always control.
For sure. And also the funny thing is, like, people will be like, oh, soldiers, some of them are like egomaniacs. They're into their uniforms and stuff. But like, American soldiers have an ego that they're the good guys.
Yeah.
And it actually compels them, that egotistical conception compels many of them to try to achieve that standard.
Yeah.
And, you know, but I want to say that one of the greatest Marines I celebrate from my book, he's not a big character, is Sergeant Damon Fawcett, who outside of Nasiriyah, when an American female soldier named Jessica Lynch was captured and we were there. We were the squirrel, like the reaction force, initially to try to go get them or something. But, and everybody, it was like our first taste of war. And everybody was like, I was like emotional and angry. And they're like, they were saying like, they've broken, I don't know where they were getting this rumors, but they're like, they broke her bones and they're raping her now.
Yeah.
And we were like a mile, we could see smoke rising from the hospital that like
Yeah.
this was happening. And we had driven past the army trucks that had blood pooled around them where the soldiers were taken. Right. And so we're all in this fit of emotion and like, oh, fuck, you know what? People like an hour ago, they were like, this war may be immoral, like Rudy stuff. Suddenly like, let's just fucking kill them.
Yeah.
And suddenly Damon Fawcett goes like, hey guys, you know, it's not like we don't have psychopaths at home who do this kind of shit all the time.
Yeah.
And like everybody was like, oh yeah, you're right. It was so like such this deflation of like a war crime kind of mind. And it was like, that's what these guys brought to the fight.
Yeah.
You know, they brought a morality to the fight.
Yeah.
And a desire to do good.
Yeah.
That was really impressive. And what else is there in life? That like, is there anything more worthy?
No.
You know,
I think there were a lot of scenes like that in the book and in the series of them. Like, I mean, you get the typical, like, kill all the Hadjis, but like, you can tell it's mostly like just letting off steam. When it came moment to moment, when civilians died, you saw that the Marines were horrified and they're like, we don't want to, be doing this. It's just kind of the realities of war. And again, I think that the humanity really comes through in the book.
Yeah, and the final thing I'll say before I jump to this one topic I wanted to get to, and then you can ask another question. I don't want to dominate with my rambling.
Please.
But Chafin, the redheaded dude who is
played by Eric Layden in the miniseries.
Eric Layden gets, he's like he's portrayed by us, seemingly like a racist, right? And by today's standards, and anyone who would interpret him as a racist based on his words, people weren't rated on their words in the Marine Corps. Words were for humor, unless it was like a military direction. Every word is meant for irony and effect. Chafin was like close as fuck with, there was no, so anyway, what I'm saying is in the military humor that we were capturing, unfortunately, some people thought that Chafin actually was a racist or something, and he wasn't. And he was using this language. They all were using the language, most of them. And it was humor to survive.
I'm so glad you brought up Chafin. I really like, he's not a huge character in the miniseries or the book, but he was one of the characters who I was like, I wish we had seen more of him, because again, I identified what you just said perfectly. It was like, there's that scene where he's kind of like talking shit against, Mexicans or something. And then immediately they talk shit about a different group. And one of the guys he was arguing with, calling names, is like, now he's like high-fiving him. He's like, hell yeah. Like, and it's just like, you could tell it's like the camaraderie. It's just how guys are. It's like, there's a lot of like, I'm going to talk shit on you, and then we're going to talk shit on this guy. And it's because we're all friends. Yeah. And I love that aspect of his character specifically.
So, it's funny because like a lot of the film, the TV show, the dialogue, as much as we could, it's actually the dialogue from the real Marines. So it's like nobody noticed that, Chafin says, like he's talking about Mexicans, and then he's like, come on, Gabe, let's join the border patrol when we got out of the Marine Corps and shoot Mexicans together. Right? Yeah. Or Garza says that to him. The whole joke was his best friend was he was closer to Garza than anybody else in the unit.
Absolutely.
And their plan was to join the border patrol and shoot Mexicans together.
Yeah.
If people thought that was a serious plan.
No.
Yeah. So that was a big mistake. Before I go off on my other tangent, is there anything you wanted to ask me?
I guess just the last thing is just, what was because you were a consultant on the miniseries, like what was the experience like for you being there, writing on that, getting like seeing your words come to life in these really incredible actors? Like the casting was absolutely fantastic. So what was that just experience like for you, seeing it come alive?
So first of all, it was fantastic. However, if I'd had a decent agent, I would not have been a consulting producer.
I know.
I was an executive producer and a creator of that show.
Yeah.
So burns me. And also it really meant I didn't make much money from it.
I understand.
But, which is at the end of the day, you need from your work. Relatively speaking, didn't make much money from it, from the HBO side of it. But what I wanted to say was that, with that caveat, it was the most incredible experience. It was a little surreal because we rebuilt everything in Africa. Everything was followed, and I, brought on these, it was my idea. So David and Ed, like, film companies are cheap. They don't want to waste money. And so when we finished the scripts, and HBO was like, great, we love them. They're so authentic. They're like, let's go and shoot it. And I was like, we cannot do this without real Marines. And they're like, what do you mean? Well, they're like, the scripts look really authentic. And I was like, yeah, but I can't, the words are authentic and everything is checked. But I was like looking through a soda straw. To look at the big picture, how they blouse their boots and stuff. I don't know shit about that. So what happened is, it was incredible bringing several of the real Marines on set, building our tents, building our Humvees. There's Lee Turgeson walking around in my shirt that I purchased from Urban Outfitters, my Superfly shirt. And it was really weird. And honestly, at first, Alex Skarsgård had a tough time with getting Colbert. In fact, Alex had been in the Swedish Marine Corps.
Oh, wow.
So
I didn't know that.
Yes. And that was part of what he brought to it. He was a Swedish Marine. And he looks like Colbert, actually. And so we did our first table read. And Alex, we get to Colbert's parts. And he was like, and now, men, get into the Humvee. Out. And we're like, I was like, no. Colbert talks like he's at a cocktail party. He's like, gentlemen, get out of the Humvee now. All right, boy. All right, men, we're gonna roll into the town, and I guess we're gonna get lit up, right? So I was like, he doesn't talk like that. So, but I like really wanted Alex because he was like cool and physically, he was just like great, and he's a great guy.
Oh, fantastic.
And so eager, but I was like, oh, you're missing. It's not going to work. He's the center of this, his dry humor. So we had a voice coach. I played recordings. Nothing worked. And this is why actors are so cool. One day, so we're in Africa, and I'll be perfectly honest. Producers wanted to replace Alex Skarsgård with Lohan, the actor who played Doc Bryan.
Oh, okay.
Jonah Lotan. I want to make sure I get his name right in the final thing of this. It's Jonah Lotan, I think. The Skarsgård was going to be replaced. And we were going to be, we can't do this. We can't spend $80 million in Africa with this guy who's shouting Colbert's lines. And Jonah is a fantastic actor. And he just had this gravitas too. And so, but I was like, I want Skarsgård because he looks like he's right. And so Colbert had sent me a bunch of emails. He'd been training with British Marines. And Colbert actually, in person, has this humor. So actors have this process. When you're on set with them, there's this whole thing. You can't give them the line. You can't say it like this. It's this, you can say can you add emotion? But it's this thing. If you say the line and try to force them to copy it, it's like pissing on a writer's computer. So, but I got to the point of I played tapes for Skarsgård. He couldn't get it. This is what's beautiful. It's it shows me how the mind works creatively, the imagination. In that, Colbert had been training in England with UK Marines. Colbert, like me, he likes to make fun of English people. And yet Colbert has a very sort of Monty Python sense of humor. And he writes this hilarious email to me about the English and how much how stupid the British are. And I send it, and it's a half page, and I give it to Skarsgård one night. He reads 2 emails from Colbert, and he's like, oh, he said he read the email. I see him smiling, and he's like, oh, I understand.
I get it.
He couldn't understand Colbert based on hearing the tone of his voice
Yeah.
or even the words in my script. But once he saw how Colbert wrote a private
Yeah.
email,
Yeah.
oh my God.
That's the key.
Yeah. Yeah. Those actors killed it. Killed it.
They were so fantastic. They were all incredible. They all brought such a richness to the thing. They're all distinctive, and you understand their backstory without even having it explained. It's, again, my favorite miniseries of all time. And there's some great ones out there, don't get me wrong. Especially HBO has done a lot of great ones, but man, Generation Kill is something else entirely.
Thank you. And it was like, by the way, I wrote it and everything, which I will fight for more credit on the show than I was given.
You
But at
should,
the
yeah.
same time, all credit due to the Marines, to the
Yeah.
Iraqis. They were
Yep.
so gracious. Anyway, what I want to close with, and I can come back anytime. I'll talk about any TV
Absolutely.
show. I love
Yeah.
to talk. But
Yeah.
I don't like to write for free, but I'll talk for free.
Absolutely.
So the reason I'm deep into this is last year. So as I said at the beginning, we lost our photographers for Iraq. So when I went to Iraq, the one thing I wanted a photographer, but we didn't have one. And I was in the middle of the desert, but I'm a weirdo who, I used to be as a teenager, I was a fucking photojournalist. And weird. I have this whole story. I actually shot stories when I was like 11 years old. I shot Dennis Kucinich, the congressman. I was like this weird kid, and I wanted to be a photo guy. And so as an adult, I would often carry a couple cameras with me for my reporting. And now I work with photographers, so I couldn't offend them by shooting. But so when I was in Iraq, I had 50 rolls of film, a Leica M6, which is a cool ass camera for film. And I had this early Sony digital, and I shot 2,000 film pictures and 6,000 digital. And now I joined the unit. I arrived at Camp Matilda on March 11th, met the unit on like March 12th or 14th. And I was with them through May 3rd or 5th. And I photographed them every day as we moved. And they illustrated my first work, but we only released a few. And then Nate Fick used my pictures in his book. And we did a show somewhere in Europe at some point, but I never looked at them again. And last year I started posting some on Twitter.
Yep, I saw some of those.
Yeah, I'd always post a few because what else am I going to talk about? So, but oh my God, what happened is like they got like millions, like literally like whatever it's called, repeats. Why am I,
retweets?
Millions. Like in the span of a month. And all these people were like, where can I get these? And I was like, oh my God. So I started working with people who were like, oh, it'd be really easy to sell them. High quality prints. But what I didn't realize has been like horrendous is nobody else could sort through these 8,000 images but me. And they're like in boxes, and I'd had to scan. I mean, they had been scanned incompetently by somebody before. So the project, what has happened, we're releasing a website. I'm working with this company that it's the real Marines of Generation Kill, because I shot all of these guys and I was so happy that HBO sort of celebrated this unit, but in a weird way, the real people that did this, and that there's a lot of people out there who actually don't know it really happened. Right.
Yeah.
And also the other funny thing is I didn't realize, because I know it all happened. Right. I didn't realize that people were like, oh, it's a Hollywood, so there's license. Like the little cute stuff, like Garza lost his helmet and was like in a football helmet, an Iraqi helmet. I don't know why, but like when I put up those pictures, people were like, holy shit, where can I get a picture of Garza in a football helmet? It's inspiring to me. And I was like, oh, like I don't understand the relationship a fan with the show has
Yeah.
But I'm seeing it now because the show was like almost like the last afterthought. And so I've spent a year going through these photos. And what I've done is we've edited them so that they follow the narrative. And the crazy thing is, like, and I realized because when I was producing this show, this is the last time I used my photos. We used them as the reference photos for the production.
Yeah.
So it's really shocking now, 20 years later, for me to go through and sort of look at my 60-day journey reporting. But also I'm like, man, like they really look like the real Marines. But the final thing is, like, the real Marines look way cooler than the actors. And so we put them up on this website. It's not up yet. It'll be up soon, where you're like comparing them. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, like, there's a map in the book, but we redid it. And the photos will follow the map. So then people can see in context, like, where we shot the shepherd. Yeah. It was like so amazing. I'd never paid attention to this. I overlaid the map of our invasion with the ancient map of Sumeria and the biblical maps. Yeah. And like, we always talked about it, but I was like, holy fuck. I mean, according to not just the Bible, but like archaeologists, like we were telling like fart jokes and shooting people where Noah was born. Yeah. You know? Camp Matilda itself was in the outer limits of what people think is the Garden of Eden.
Oh, wow.
You know, and where the engineer got his foot blown off and there was an Easter service, that was in fucking Babylon. And so we've created this map where you follow the unit, because that unit, what First Recon did is the longest march in Marine Corps history. Yeah. On land, I believe. So we follow it, but you can sort of trace these photos of the real guys, but you can also see that, oh, they were like in these holy lands. And so what I also saw, what I'll close with about this project and culturally, and I have to, tell. So this is a liability with me. I will come late and then talk way beyond
no, it's fine.
My time. But
it's absolutely fine.
I started to learn the impact of Generation Kill in 2017 when some Russians contacted me from this company called Wagner. And in 2017, they weren't very well known. They were headed by this like kind of charismatic criminal guy, Gagosian. And I knew nothing of them or him. And in 2017 and roughly 18, I have this great Russian friend, Russian American, who introduced me to them. And these guys, and they were like, we want you to embed with us and go to Syria and write Generation Kill of Wagner. And so my Russian friend, who was like sort of the interlocutor, like, Evan, he's like, these Wagner guys, they're not like the Marines in Generation Kill. They like kill puppies for fun. And he's like, but they're Russians. And he's like, they don't realize they're evil. And he said, what will happen is if you embed with them, you will write how evil they are, and then they will have to kill you. And so I was like, this sounds tricky. And plus they wanted to pay me a lot of money, but I would have to sign agreements. Like I wasn't paid by the Marine Corps to write about it. So absolutely. I was like, I don't think it's going to work. And then like, thankfully I needed money back then. I was a little tempted, but then I got hired in TV land to be a producer on Dirty John, the TV show. In my other life, I'm doing that stuff. So Wagner's out of the picture, and I'm like, no, I'm getting Hollywood money. Fuck this. And then the unit I was going to be with was slaughtered by the United States in Syria. Famously, there was this, if you look it up, this Wagner group was rushing to steal an oil field, and the U.S. just fucking hammered them. My God. And they killed like half the guys I was going to be with. And my reaction to that, first of all, was like, as an individual, I don't think about like, oh, fans who love Generation Kill. I was more like, oh, fuck, all those people who hate me would be laughing and how how the
Oh.
author of Generation Kill got like bombed by the US Air Force.
Oh God.
So that didn't happen. And but about a year ago, I'm posting pictures of like the reporting pictures. People are
Yeah.
like, oh, we love those. And how can we get some? And at the same time, now I'm back. Oh, before the invasion of Ukraine. Oh, dude, you're in film. We're going to have to do more shows.
Yes.
Look up Iskander Galiv, last name Galiev on IMDb. Iskander, Iskander.
You got him right here. Yep.
It probably shows a bunch of films and Russian films and Afghan documentaries.
Yes. Yes.
So Iskander is an Afghan war veteran, Russian mafia, who used to own a piece of a Moscow airport. He's what they call a 90s man in Russia. He rose up, and before the invasion of Ukraine, Iskander flew to LA. He wasn't on the sanctions list. And through my Russian friends, he was like, I want to meet you. Now, Iskander speaks shit English, so we had a translator.
Yeah.
But basically, he's like, so what I'm getting at is these Americans have no idea how crazy they are. The gangsters who got into the government and the military and work or in a quasi capacity outside of it love action films. And many, like Iskander was a gangster slash filmmaker. So he flies to LA and he's like, yeah, he's in Putin's inner circle. I've got pictures of him. He's a Canadian citizen. He's a really interesting guy. And he like flies to LA and he's like, I want to give you a large sum of money to put your name on a script in Russian. And again, I was like, oh man, I love large sums of money.
Yes.
Like just large sums of money. It just sounds good. Like that sounds better than taking like a Lexapro or something.
Yeah.
You know,
no.
large. So, but I'm like, I can't take it from a dirty Russian.
Yeah.
Like you're a weirdo Russian killer and you're hilarious at this dinner. But we were both in Afghanistan, so we had this like contact, right? But I was like, they're trying to co-opt me. Yeah. And I'm like, thank God nobody's hiring me right now, but the Russians want to co-opt me. How sad.
Oh God. Yes.
No, but I was like, no, I can't take your money. But what I learned is that Generation Kill played for like a few years on this like military channel in Russia. Mm-hmm. And all these guys watched it and a lot of them emulated like sort of the attitude because Russians have this like love-hate relationship with America. Yeah. And so I was like seeing all of this. So what happened is after the war started, through Iskander, we reached out to Prigozhin and I wrote him like a letter and I was like, I want to cover you. So I was trying to go to Russia from November to 2022, I think, until Prigozhin died. Yeah. And supposedly we were making headway and we thought we could go. I don't know. It would have been an incredible story. Now, how am I getting here? It's somewhere to do with Generation Kill. So the cultural impact. Yeah. It was there. I was like, Russians like Generation Kill? Yes. That's weird. And it's really popular with militaries around the world. And the last thing I'll say, and with this photo project, and what's cool is I'm working with an Army veteran and a Marine, a first recon Marine is involved in this business. Oh, wow. Photos. Yeah. I love working with veterans. Yeah. They're just like great. And, but what I also learned, aside from there's an international, like all these people who see it for the way they view America. Yeah. Is that what I've seen is that in a way that I'm very proud of because I'm not a reporter anymore. My reporting is done on these guys. So I'm an ex-journalist. I have a license to be friends with these people. Yeah. And in a weird way, I'm like a weird person who doesn't fit because like I'm not in the VA health system. Yeah. But I have like PTSD issues that my like, normal doctors don't like. When I tell them I was like in combat and stuff, they think I'm like making it up. Like seriously. Oh God. Yeah. You know? So I'm a fish out of water. I'm very close to combat veterans because we have these shared experiences, but I was
Yeah,
not in the military and I would never claim
of course.
those
Yeah.
particular stresses that they had.
Yeah.
So, but what I'm saying is I've realized that those guys I covered and the generation that fought in the global war of terror, when I came home from Iraq, when we did Generation Kill, it was released at a time when Americans were interested in the war, but collectively we were desperate to get past it. We wanted just to win it and get out or lose it and get out. And in a way, no one, even the veterans themselves, they were either stuck in the war going back again and again, or they were
Yep.
just eager to get home and like not
Yep.
think about it anymore. And they also had to answer for it. And plus, what American society was doing was telling the veterans what their experience was. Just as the reporters who first covered the war had a paradigm that it fit into, when the veterans returned home, the media had a new paradigm. It was Michael Moore movies. Oh, you're the
Yeah.
loser who was recruited at the mall.
Yeah.
Fuck you. That was not a loser who was recruited at the mall. That was like a person who had their shit together or wanted an adventure, or they came from a bad home or poverty and they were taking the initiative to get out. Fuck you for casting the vets like that. Some of them did get taken advantage of in any job. Some of them didn't work.
Sure.
But like, no way, man. So the vets came home to this preconceived thing. They had to deal with that bullshit, you know? And so, and by the way, you know, that's why they don't want to have to explain the whole war. Every story I tell you takes like an hour to fucking tell you. Imagine them,
Yeah.
you know, to relay their experiences. You know, they had that burden, right? So they come home, they basically shut up about the wars, or they went along with society said, like, yeah, it kind of sucked. I was taking advantage of the mall. Or no, well, it's more of a hero than you realize. But few of them would say that because they all questioned the war we pulled out, etc. So
Absolutely.
anyway, what I'm getting at is now, 20 years later, they're older. They've had distance, and it's no longer the present day shit they want to get away from. It's like I realized when they saw my pictures, and this was like all, it was veterans, it's like other journalists, it's like people who were there. They saw it and they're like, it's now sparking like, oh yeah, that's when I was there 20 years ago. That's when I was with those awesome people. That's when I saw those horrible things that I'm now talking about. Or that's when I saw those great things that nobody understood. And so what I love about my book, it wasn't that it came out and got talked about then by the American public.
Yeah.
I love it now that it's like this residual thing, this place. And I love the fans who love history, who are trying to relate with it that way, or they just love video games or whatever, because I'm that person.
Yeah.
But it means something to the military people. And again, what I love the most is to the extent I could, I carried their stories and brought them out. That was my job.
Yeah.
And I love the fact I feel I fairly well succeeded in that.
Oh, you did.
And the last thing I'll tell you, because you're out there in the land of, I think, there's a lot of people that are into war that have never served.
Yeah.
And there's this whole like almost self-conscious thing like, oh, well, I've never served, so no one knows what war is like. I entered war. I said this to my editor from the very start. My job was always to demystify. When I hung out with white supremacists, it was some of my first reporting for Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
How did I demystify neo-Nazis in Idaho that I met? It was I got them to talk, and they all admitted that they were like really afraid of black people. They were really afraid of Jewish people. And many of them had been on like Prozac and stuff, and it failed.
Yeah.
And I saw they weren't like, they were scary because they were hateful, but they also like just were really afraid people. Right.
Yeah.
So I've always wanted to show people for what they are.
Yeah.
In the reporting. And so I was proud of that. So, but what I wanted to get to, I started to wander, is that people who haven't covered war are often a little bit like intimidated. And I felt this way, That's why I told my reporter, my boss at Rolling Stone, I don't know, I was a historian who covered war and I felt this
Yeah.
lacking. Like, how could
Yeah.
I participate in like taking pleasure in war movies and then
Yeah.
not cover it? And
Yeah.
I like, so I must not understand it. I must glorify it.
Yeah.
And other writers talk about how we try to make things that are critical of war. It turns into war porn, whatever.
Yeah.
War porn. It was coined by, I forget his name. We'll get to that in a moment. But the point is, when I got into combat, I'm very proud to say I was not a jock. I was an outdoors person. I grew up in the
Yeah.
woods in Ohio, but I wasn't a jock. I didn't play well on teams. So I wasn't like this macho guy who was like, yeah, coach. And like, I was like a guy who liked poetry. I liked war, poetry, hanging out with girls in the woods, smoking cigarettes and weed, and like pastoral pursuits like that. And then I studied war as a hardcore medieval historian. And so I get to war. Oh, and I loved, war films. And I get to war and I was like, you know what? Because people would be like, the Marines themselves are like, how did you prepare for war? And I got to my joke answers. I lived with an Armenian, all these things. My mom was an alcoholic, crazy, charismatic person. Like, it helps to have a bad background that you've overcome in some way. But that's my standard answer. But the truth is, I had a fantastic imagination.
Yeah.
And honestly speaking, and so this is encouragement to everybody out there who's trying to understand war through their imaginations. I'm here to tell you the imagination works. It's a powerful tool. And I had a fairly accurate conception of war and human psychology in war based on reading books and watching TV shows and even playing video games. So like Grand Theft Auto was like, I'm not a big gamer, but that was like the last of my generation. And like, so I'm saying this because there's stuff that it's hard to understand if you haven't been there. But I say this because never get spellbound or mesmerized by people who say, I was there, therefore you don't know. No, you have common sense. You have an imagination. You can work this stuff out. And having been there does not alone make you a more authority over a person who hasn't been there. And in a civilian society, it's important to understand this.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great place to end this on. Thank you so much for joining me today, Evan. If you guys have not, definitely go check out the book. I have it right here in my hands. One of the best reads I've had in a very long time. Definitely check out Evan's new project when it comes out. If you want to let me know when it comes out, I'm happy to share it out with my audience.
I wish I could give you a website and a name. And
no,
unslick, but somewhere, a name somewhere. I'll give it
when it comes out. I'm happy to share it out with my community. I'm happy to have you on again. If you ever want to come on again, I'd love to talk with you more about all this stuff. It's been a fantastic chat with you, and everyone stay tuned for the next episode of Into the Kinoverse coming soon. Thanks.